Have you ever had the unsettling feeling that a moment didn't unfold the way it was supposed to? Like time hesitated, corrected itself, and moved on without explanation. You're standing in line, checking your phone, listening to someone speak, and a detail lands with strange precision, as if you've already lived this exact second. Nothing dramatic happens. No glitch, no shock, just a quiet pause inside you. A sense that reality almost revealed something, and then closed again. These moments don't come when you're searching for meaning. They happen during ordinary routines, when attention is relaxed. That's what makes them difficult to dismiss. In conversations about quantum consciousness and hidden reality, experiences like this are usually brushed off as coincidence or memory error. But when it happens to you, it doesn't feel random. It feels specific, almost measured. You might notice it as a brief stillness behind the eyes, a subtle pressure in the chest, a feeling that explanation is slightly delayed compared to perception. You continue with your day, yet something lingers. Not fear, not belief, just the impression that the structure of reality didn't fully align this time. Modern physics insists the world should behave predictably at our scale. Your experience suggests otherwise. And if that tension between what's observed and what's explained is real, even for a moment, then stepping away now doesn't restore certainty. It means leaving just before the edge becomes visible. That lingering tension you felt doesn't need to be resolved or shared outwardly. Most people register it in a quieter way, almost like an internal acknowledgement that something important just passed through their awareness. Moments like this are often marked silently, the same way you mentally note a thought worth returning to. Continuing here works the same way, not as a promise or habit, but as a deliberate choice to stay with a question that hasn't finished forming yet. If this connected to something personal, leave a single line that completes the thought you're already having. Begin it with, "I noticed that," "I've been sensing," or "this made me realize," and make it specific to one moment or feeling you rarely articulate. Because what comes next isn't interpretation or philosophy. It's the first place where modern science itself was forced to admit that reality does not behave the way it was designed to. For most of the last century, physics held onto a comforting assumption. The universe unfolds independently, and we simply observe what is already there. That assumption fractured in 1989 at the Hitachi Advanced Research Laboratory in Japan, when physicist Akira Tonomura refined the double-slit experiment in a way no one had managed before. Instead of firing streams of particles, his team released single electrons, one at a time, inside an ultra-isolated system. Each electron should have behaved like a tiny solid object. But when no attempt was made to detect which path it took, the results slowly formed an interference pattern, as if every electron had spread itself across multiple possibilities within the quantum field before arriving. Then the conditions changed. The moment detectors were introduced to determine the electron's path, the pattern vanished. The electrons behaved like localized particles again. Nothing touched them. No force was applied. Only information was added. This became one of the clearest demonstrations of the observer effect ever recorded. Observation doesn't just reveal reality. It alters how reality resolves. And this means that you are not perceiving a fully assembled world that exists exactly the same way without you. At the most fundamental level we can measure, outcomes depend on whether information is extracted. Psychologically, this feels uncomfortably familiar. The instant you expect something, possibilities narrow. Attention collapses uncertainty into a single narrative. What we call consciousness expansion isn't mystical here. It's the uneasy realization that awareness participates. Just as electrons shift behavior when observed, experiences feel different once they are anticipated, labeled, or judged. The experiment never claimed that the mind controls matter, but it quietly proved that information is not neutral. It shapes behavior before certainty appears. So if observation changes physical systems, what happens when attention becomes repetitive, when perception settles into habits over years? Because the fracture doesn't stop at particles. The next discovery suggests that reality may be structured not only by what is observed, but by how coherently observation itself is organized. And this explains why perception never feels purely mental when it shifts. It registers in the body first. In the early 2000s, neuroscientist Pascal Fries, working with research groups in Germany and the Netherlands, formalized what became known as the communication through coherence theory. Studying synchronized neural oscillations, especially in the gamma frequency range, Fries showed that information in the brain doesn't gain influence simply by being active. It gains influence when separate neural populations oscillate in sync. Coherence, not intensity, determines what becomes dominant in perception. When signals fall out of sync, information exists but fails to integrate. When they lock together, experience sharpens. This wasn't speculative. It was measured through electrophysiology and brain imaging, showing that attention literally reorganizes timing across neural networks. Perception isn't built from more data. It's built from better alignment. And this explains why certain moments arrive as sudden clarity rather than insight, why intuition feels like a pause, not a rush. When coherence increases, the body often notices first, a brief stillness in the chest, a quiet behind the eyes, a soft release of tension you didn't realize you were holding. Nothing mystical is happening. The system is simply integrating information more efficiently, reducing internal conflict. Then, just as quickly, the noise returns as predictions reassert themselves. Here's the unsettling part. Fries' work implies that the brain prioritizes stable synchronization over accuracy. Coherent models feel true because they cost less energy to maintain. This is why familiar explanations persist, even when evidence weakens them. It's also why disrupting coherence, introducing conflicting information, can feel physically uncomfortable. The quantum field doesn't just challenge particles. At the perceptual level, information itself must resonate to be accepted. Understanding this has consequences. Once you notice how coherence shapes experience, you also notice when it fractures. Familiar meanings loosen, automatic reactions slow, the sense of certainty thins, and that loss of internal synchronization isn't abstract. It's felt as unease, hesitation, even isolation. Because seeing how perception is assembled comes with a cost. The comfort of seamless reality doesn't fully return once you understand what's holding it together. Once coherence starts to loosen, the cost isn't theoretical. It shows up quietly, in places you don't immediately connect to perception at all. Conversations can feel slightly off, as if everyone else is moving in a rhythm you no longer fully share. You hear the words, understand the meaning, but something underneath doesn't settle the way it used to. You might pause longer before responding, not because you're confused, but because certainty no longer arrives automatically. This can feel isolating, not dramatic loneliness, just a subtle sense of standing a few inches outside the room. You still participate, still care, but the ease of belonging thins. Familiar explanations feel rehearsed, shared assumptions feel fragile. You may start doubting your own reactions, wondering if you're overanalyzing, if noticing this much is creating distance where none is necessary. There's often a quiet wish to return to how things felt before you noticed the seams. Motivation can shift too. Goals that once felt obvious lose their pull, not because they were wrong, but because they were built on frameworks that no longer feel solid. This isn't clarity replacing confusion. It's ambiguity replacing certainty. And ambiguity is uncomfortable to live inside for long. The brain prefers coherence, even if it's inaccurate. So when that coherence weakens, the system responds with unease. What makes this difficult is that there's no clear reward attached, no sense of progress, just a growing awareness that the surface explanations no longer hold the same weight. And yet, beneath the doubt and displacement, there's also recognition, a sense that this sensitivity didn't appear by accident, that the discomfort isn't a malfunction, but a signal that something fundamental is shifting in how experience is being organized. And that realization quietly prepares the ground for the final insight, one that reframes everything you've been feeling without offering an easy way back. What you've been calling being different was never a flaw in how you think. It's what happens when perception stops automatically smoothing over inconsistencies. Most minds are organized to preserve coherence at all costs, to keep reality feeling continuous, predictable, and intact. But your experience suggests that something in you has been noticing where that continuity quietly depends on effort. We started with moments that felt slightly misplaced. then followed them into physics, where Tannemur's experiment showed that observation isn't a passive act. Information alters outcomes before certainty exists. We moved into perception, where coherence, not intensity, determines what becomes experience, and where the brain often chooses stability over accuracy because stability costs less. Along the way, the emotional cost made sense. The hesitation, the doubt, the subtle distance from familiar explanations weren't personal failures. They were side effects of noticing how much work goes into making reality feel seamless. Seen this way, the discomfort changes meaning. Sensitivity isn't weakness. It's exposure to the mechanisms most people never feel directly. When coherence loosens, experience doesn't collapse, it widens. Possibility stops being immediately reduced to the same conclusions. That widening can feel disorienting, even lonely, because it removes the automatic reassurance of shared certainty. But it also reveals something essential. Reality isn't just encountered, it's continuously assembled, moment by moment, through attention, prediction, and integration. Here's the unsettled edge of that insight. If consciousness helps stabilize experience by organizing information into something livable, then awareness isn't merely inside the system. It's part of the boundary that defines what the system can become. Not magically, structurally. And once you sense that, perception changes direction. It stops asking only what the world is doing and starts noticing how meaning itself is being constructed. That question doesn't come with resolution. It introduces pressure instead. A sense that understanding isn't an answer, but a narrowing passage. And when you stand near it, you feel the pull to continue, not because something is missing, but because something fundamental is now visible and unfinished. So let this settle where it needs to. Not as an answer, but as a recognition that what felt like confusion was coherence arriving late. The pause you've been feeling wasn't indecision. It was perception widening beyond the shortcuts it used to rely on. Staying connected from here isn't about following a channel or agreeing with conclusions. It's about choosing continuity over retreat, allowing attention to keep tracing the patterns it has already begun to see. There's a natural next step in this movement, one that turns the lens inward and examines how meaning quietly hardens into repetition and strain. It's called How Your Beliefs Quietly Create Your Suffering, and it continues exactly where this awareness leaves off. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.